The wind howled like a beast unleashed, tearing through the skeletal branches of the ancient pines that guarded the edge of Willow Creek, a forgotten hollow in the Montana Rockies where the world seemed to end at the snow-dusted horizon. It was the kind of storm that didn't just fall from the sky, it clawed its way down, burying everything in a relentless white fury that swallowed roads, homes, and hope alike. In the dim glow of a single porch light flickering against the onslaught, stood Eleanor Hayes, 87 years young but bent like the willows that named her town, her frail hands clutching a threadbare shawl against the bite that seeped through the cracks of her sagging farmhouse. She had lived alone here for 23 years, since the day her husband, Tom, had slipped away in his sleep, leaving her with nothing but echoes and a heart too heavy to mend. That night, as the blizzard raged on December 14, 2017, Eleanor peered into the abyss beyond her window, whispering a prayer not for herself, but for whatever lost soul the storm might claim, unaware that fate was about to roar up her drive on 15 rumbling shadows, engines growling defiance against the white death closing in. If you believe in the quiet power of kindness, in second chances that bloom from the unlikeliest soil, then hit that like button right now, drop a comment sharing a time when a stranger changed your world, share this story with someone who needs a reminder that good still exists, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks for more tales that warm the soul. We're building a community here, one heartfelt moment at a time. Eleanor's life had long been a tapestry woven from threads of quiet endurance, the kind that doesn't seek applause but simply holds the world together in its frayed corners. Born in 1930 to Dust Bowl farmers who taught her that survival meant sharing the last crust of bread even when your own belly ached, she had carried that lesson like a talisman through the lean years of her marriage to Tom, a logger whose calloused hands built their home plank by weathered plank on this unforgiving land. They had no children, fate's cruel jest, doctors called it barrenness, but Eleanor saw it as a spacious heart left empty for mending others. In her youth, she mended neighbors' fences, baked pies for the grieving, and opened her door to wanderers passing through on freight trains that rattled the valley like thunder. But time, that relentless thief, had stolen her vigor, arthritis twisted her fingers into gnarled roots, and the farm, once a patchwork of golden wheat, now lay fallow under mortgages that nipped at her heels like starving wolves. Tom's pension barely covered the heat, and winters like this one tested her like never before. Last season, she'd pawned her wedding ring just to keep the pipes from freezing, staring at the empty spot on her finger as if it mirrored the void in her chest. Loneliness was her constant companion now, a shadow that deepened with each sunset, whispering that her days of giving were done, that the world had spun on without her, leaving her adrift in a sea of silence broken only by the creak of the old house settling into the earth. Yet, on that fateful evening, as the storm's fury painted her windows with frost-laced veils, Eleanor lit the hearth with the last split logs from the shed, her breath visible in the chill that invaded even the kitchen, and brewed a pot of chamomile tea strong enough to chase away ghosts. She didn't know why, perhaps it was the way the wind mourned, carrying faint echoes of Tom's laughter from summers long past, but she felt a pull, an inexplicable urge to prepare, as if the night itself was calling her name. The roar shattered the storm's monologue just past midnight, a guttural symphony of engines slicing through the gale like knives through silk, headlights piercing the blizzard's veil in erratic beams that danced across Eleanor's frost-etched panes. She froze at the sink, suds dripping from a plate she'd been scrubbing for the third time that night, her heart stuttering in the sudden clamor. Through the blur of snow, she made out the silhouettes, 15 Harley-Davidsons, their chrome flanks caked in ice, pulling into her drive in a ragged formation that spoke of desperation more than design. The riders dismounted like specters, leather-clad giants hunched against the wind, bandanas whipping like flags of surrender as they pounded on her door with fists that could fell oaks. Eleanor hesitated, her mind flashing to the warnings in the local paper, gangs on the move, rough souls with tattoos mapping stories of regret and rage. But then she saw it. The lead rider, a burly man with a salt and pepper beard framing eyes hollowed by exhaustion, cradling his arm as if it were a broken wing, and behind him, a woman with fire-red hair plastered to her face, shivering so violently her knees buckled. Something in Eleanor's soul cracked open then, a fissure letting in the light of memory. Tom, welcoming storm-lost loggers to their table in 68, sharing stew and stories until dawn. With trembling hands, she unbolted the door, the hinges wailing in protest, and stepped back, her voice a whisper swallowed by the wind. The words weren't needed, her open threshold was invitation enough. They tumbled in like an avalanche of leather and grit, 15 strangers filling the cramped warmth of her living room with the scent of wet wool, engine oil, and unspoken fears. There was Jax, the bearded leader with a gash across his knuckles from a bar fight he'd rather forget, nursing a sprained wrist from wrestling his bike through a drift that nearly claimed him. Beside him, Lena, his on-again off-again flame, her red hair now drying into wild curls, hiding bruises from a life that had kicked her too many times. Then the others, Rico, the tattooed mechanic whose laugh boomed like thunder despite the cold gnawing at his bones, Sarah, a quiet veteran with scars from tours overseas etched deeper than her ink, and the rest, a motley brotherhood forged in the fire of open roads and closed chapters, from ex-cons seeking redemption to dreamers chasing horizons that always seemed just out of reach. Eleanor's home, with its faded floral wallpaper peeling at the seams and furniture worn smooth by decades of quiet living, suddenly pulsed with life, a cacophony of boots thudding on rag rugs, coats sloughing off snow in crystalline heaps by the fire, and the low murmur of relief as bodies thawed near the crackling flames. She moved among them like a ghost in her own house, her slight frame weaving through the giants with pots of stew she'd thawed from the freezer. Rabbit and root vegetables simmered slow, a recipe from her mother that filled the air with earth and comfort. Her hands, those twisted sentinels of age, ladled portions with a grace born of habit, ignoring the ache that shot up her arms like lightning, ignoring too the way her pulse raced at the sheer otherness of them, these road warriors whose eyes held storms of their own. Jax caught her gaze first, his voice gravel rough as he accepted the bowl, murmuring thanks that hung heavy in the air, laced with the weight of a man unused to mercy. Lena, curled on the threadbare sofa with a blanket Eleanor had knit in her healthier days, let slip a tear that traced a path through the grime on her cheek, her fingers brushing the old woman's as she took the mug of tea, a simple touch that bridged chasms neither had known were there. As the night deepened, the storm outside battering the roof like an impatient lover, Eleanor's farmhouse transformed into a fragile sanctuary, a bubble of warmth against the world's indifference. She watched them from the kitchen doorway, her back against the frame for support, as stories unfurled like smoke from the hearth, tales of miles devoured under starlit skies, of brothers lost to the bottle or the badge, of the freedom that tasted like dust and diesel but kept the demons at bay. Rico sketched a crude map on a napkin, plotting a detour around the impassable pass, his pencil strokes pausing when he noticed Eleanor's shadow, inviting her with a nod to join the circle on the floor. She did, sinking onto a stool with a wince she hid behind a smile, her voice soft as falling snow as she shared fragments of her own odyssey. The war that took her brother's legs, the flood of '79 that drowned the valley's dreams, the quiet nights after Tom's passing when she'd sit by this very fire, wondering if kindness was just a fool's currency in a world gone greedy. Jax leaned forward, his injured arm cradled in his lap, listening with an intensity that stripped away his tough veneer, revealing the boy who'd once fixed neighbors' bikes for free before life veered him toward darker paths. Lena, emboldened by the tea's warmth, confessed her fears, the cycle of bad choices that looped like a busted chain, the child she'd left with her sister years ago, a ghost that haunted her rearview mirror. In those hours, barriers crumbled not with grand gestures but in the small sacraments of shared space. Sarah mending a tear in Eleanor's shawl with thread from her pack, her stitches precise as a soldier's aim. Another rider, a lanky kid named Toby with eyes too old for his face, chopping wood from the last scraps in the shed despite the wind's howl, stacking it by the door so Eleanor wouldn't have to. The old woman felt the stirrings of something long dormant, a spark in the ashes of her solitude, flickering against the chill of doubt that had settled in her bones. But beneath the budding warmth lurked her private tempests, the gnawing worry over the electric bill that would arrive like a guillotine come spring, the creak in the roof that hinted at collapse under another heavy snow, the ache of knowing this night was a comet's tail, brilliant but fleeting, leaving her alone again when the plows cleared the way. Dawn crept in reluctant and raw, the storm's rage ebbing to a mournful whimper, painting the sky in bruised purples and golds that filtered through the lace curtains like hesitant promises. Eleanor stirred before the others, her joints protesting the night's unaccustomed company, slipping into the kitchen to brew coffee from Brown's ration for special occasions, now seemed as special as any. The house hummed with the soft snores of the sleepers sprawled across floors and furniture, their faces softened in repose, the leather armor shed like old skins. She paused at the window, wiping a circle in the condensation with her sleeve, gazing out at the yard transformed into a tundra, the bikes huddled like faithful hounds under tarps she'd fetched from the barn in the wee hours. Gratitude swelled in her chest, mingled with a poignant sorrow. These souls, with their thunderous arrivals and whispered vulnerabilities, had reminded her that her heart still beat with purpose, yet the road would call them away, leaving echoes in the empty rooms. As the first riders roused, Jax stretching with a grimace, Lena rubbing sleep from her eyes, Eleanor pressed tin mugs of coffee into their hands, her smile a fragile bridge over the goodbye she dreaded. They gathered their gear in a ritual of reluctant efficiency, boots laced, jackets zipped, thanks murmured like prayers over the bowls of oatmeal she'd somehow stretched to feed them all. One by one, they stepped into the crisp morning air, engines coughing to life in a chorus that vibrated the frozen ground, and Eleanor stood on the porch, shawl tight around her shoulders, waving as they idled in the drive, Jax tipping his helmet in a salute that lingered a beat too long. The procession began to roll out, taillights winking like fireflies in the pale light, and she turned back inside, the door clicking shut with a finality that echoed her sigh. Another chapter closed, the house settling back into its solitary rhythm. But as the last bike's rumble faded into the distance, a new thunder stirred on the horizon, growing from a distant hum to a seismic growl that rattled the windows and set Eleanor's pulse racing anew. She flung open the door, breath catching in her throat, and there, spilling over the rise like a silver serpent uncoiling, came the impossible. 100 motorcycles, maybe more, gleaming under the emerging sun, their riders dismounting in a wave of synchronized grace that turned her snow-blanketed yard into a sea of chrome and camaraderie. Banners fluttered from handlebars, hand-scrawled signs reading, "Thanks, Eleanor," and "Queen of the Road," and engines cut off one by one in a cascading silence broken only by boots crunching snow and the murmur of awestruck voices. Jax was at the fore, his sprained wrist forgotten, grinning like a man reborn as he strode forward, Lena at his side, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Behind them, the brotherhood had multiplied overnight, word rippling through the network of riders like wildfire on the wind, texts fired off in the witching hours from Eleanor's very living room, calls bridging states and scars, summoning kin from Boise to Billings, from Casper to Cheyenne. These weren't just bikers, they were a legion of the road-worn, the reformed, the restless, drawn by tales of the old woman's hearth that Jax had spun in frantic bursts between sips of stew, how she'd opened her door without question, shared her last warmth with strangers who reeked of trouble, listened to their fractures without judgment, mending invisible wounds with the simple act of seeing them whole. Now, they came bearing tribute, a flatbed truck rumbling up last, laden with lumber for her roof, generators to banish her power woes, canned goods stacked like battle rations, and envelopes thick with cash, pulled from saddlebags across the miles, enough to silence the mortgage's growl for years. Rico, the mechanic, knelt in the snow to tweak her ancient truck's carburetor, his tools flashing like stars. Sarah organized the women riders into a crew that scrubbed her home's facade, revealing the proud blue paint beneath years of neglect. Toby, the young one, led a team to clear drifts from her drive, his laughter ringing clear as the axes bit into ice. Eleanor stood amid the whirlwind, tears carving warm paths down her weathered cheeks, her hands clasped as if in prayer, overwhelmed by the tide of humanity that had crashed upon her shores. Jax enveloped her in a bear hug that lifted her off her feet, his voice thick as he pulled back. The words weren't spoken aloud in the hush that fell, but they hung in the air. "You gave us shelter, now we build you a fortress." Lena draped a leather vest over Eleanor's shoulders, emblazoned with a patch reading, "Road Angel," and the crowd erupted in cheers that shook the pines, a symphony of vrooming engines spelling her name in exhaust clouds that curled like blessings toward the sky. In that moment, as the sun crested fully, bathing the improbable gathering in golden light, Eleanor's world realigned, not with fanfare or fortune alone, but with the profound realization that kindness was no solitary flame, but a bonfire fed by unseen hands, leaping from heart to heart across divides of age and asphalt. The challenges that had loomed like storm clouds, the isolation that clawed at her nights, the financial specters that haunted her days, the doubt that her legacy was dust, dissolved in the heat of this unexpected dawn, replaced by a tapestry rewoven with threads of belonging. She spent the day among them, her laughter mingling with theirs as they worked, sharing stories that wove new patterns. Jax revealing his plans to start a mechanic's shop for at-risk youth, inspired by her unyielding grace, Lena vowing to bridge the gap with her estranged daughter, the seed planted in the glow of that fireside confessional. By dusk, as the armada prepared to depart, Leaving her home fortified and her pantry brimming, Eleanor stood once more on the porch, the vest a warm weight on her frame, waving to the receding thunder. But this time, the silence that followed wasn't empty, it hummed with promise, with invitations scrawled on notepads, roadside diners to visit, rallies to attend, a family forged not by blood but by blizzard and benevolence. In the weeks that followed, letters arrived like snowflakes in spring, photos of chromed guardians parked outside schools and shelters, tales of chains broken and roads redeemed, all tracing back to that night when an old woman's open door cracked open the universe just a little wider. If this story has touched your heart, stirred that deep well of emotion where hope and humanity meet, then please, in this moment of shared feeling, like the video to let the light spread, comment below with your own story of unexpected kindness, share it with a friend who's weathering their own storm, and subscribe to Kindness Speaks so we can keep these narratives alive together. Your engagement isn't just a click, it's a spark in the dark. And before we fade to black on Eleanor's tale, here's a special request. In the comments, share one small act of kindness you'll commit to this week, inspired by her open door, tag a friend who needs to hear it, and let's flood this thread with the good we're about to unleash. Thank you for riding this road with us.